In her house outside the town, Mrs. Conway writes her diary, paints the views from her windows, and finds no comfort in the world. Every week, John Blue delivers a box of groceries to her door, but she never comes out. It's now been a year since the accident. On Fridays, after his last delivery of the long day, which was to the mad Conway woman, John Blue was allowed to keep the van for the night. He could drive home to his mother. He was proud of the green van. He would wave to any of the boys from his school days whom he might see in their big gardens, playing with their children or grilling some chicken. His mother was happy with this arrangement. She would have dinner ready for him, and after watching their favorite TV show together, he would drive her into town to Horan's hotel for her weekly game of cards. Thomas Horan also owned the grocery store, and she thought he was a great man, a generous man, for letting her son use the van so that she could get to her card game. John said nothing, but knew Thomas Horan to be a bit of a jerk, selling stale vegetables, soft tomatoes, and eggs that were no longer fresh. He said nothing because his mother could be as nasty as her 10-year-old dog, which she allowed to sit on her lap while she fed it the best pieces of meat from her dinner plate. There was a light shower of rain as John was driving to Mrs. Conway's house. With one hand, John took out a cigarette from a packet and lit it with his Horan's Hotel cigarette lighter. He felt lucky. Lucky to have his driver's license, lucky to have his mother still alive, and lucky to be working for Thomas Horan, even if he was a bit of a jerk. April 20. A month has passed. The day is just as beautiful as that day was, the clouds low over the hills. But I hate this beauty because Billy cannot see it. I paint it, but I hate it. From my window, I can see the gate and the red flowers staining the stones with their blood. At night, the screams of hunted animals comfort me. I am not the only one in pain. In the morning, I cannot bear to dress and prefer to wear only shadows. I go to each of my 12 windows and decide which view to paint today. I might eat if my body lets me, and then I move to my chosen window and start to paint. John Blue drove carefully around the last turn before the Conway house. It occurred to him that it had been exactly a year since poor old Roger lost control of his car on this very road and killed Mrs. Conway's young son. His name was Billy, and he was only 4 or 5 years old. He and his mother were planting flowers when Roger came around the corner, shouting about the brakes. Tom Smith, who saw the whole thing from his field, later told the police everything that happened. His story earned him free vodka in the pub for a long time afterward. He said the screams of the mother nearly stopped his heart. She picked up the boy's body before Tom could get there and ran all the way up to the big house, screaming the whole time as the boy's head dropped lifelessly against her arm and shoulder. Poor old Roger sat on the grass, put his head in his hands, and didn't even recognize Tom when he went to him. Tom said Roger shouldn't have been allowed on the road, not even on a bike, because the old man was half blind. June 6th. Thomas got someone new to deliver the groceries. I knew him, Johnny Lee. He knocked on the door and stood there for a long time, looking at the fields. I don't know what he was looking at. He stretched his arms, then he yawned and knocked again. He lifted his t-shirt and scratched his stomach. With his foot, he pushed the box closer to the wall and slowly walked away, looking back at the door now and then. Later, when I was emptying the box, I found a box of chocolates I hadn't asked for. I must remember not to pay for that. Now, at the end of summer, the land is dry and the colors are slowly turning brown. In night, when the house gets dark, I look for Billy. I want to pour warm water over his small, smooth back. I want to lift him into bed and pull the blanket up to his chin. I want to kiss his eyelids as he sleeps. But instead, the darkness pulls me. One night, last winter, John Blue saw an owl standing on Mrs. Conway's gate. It didn't move as John drove the van past the gate. At first, he thought it was a shadow. He stopped by the gate and quietly rolled down the window. When the fat, dark shape turned towards him, he saw two eyes looking at him, daring him to move. Then, with 2 or 3 movements of its wings, the owl flew off towards the trees. John remembered feeling uncomfortable, as if he was being judged. August 18th. Johnny Lee still brings the groceries. For the same reason, I both hate and love seeing him at my door each week. He reminds me of a better life. I clearly remember Johnny in my class, tall and clumsy at his desk. In the end, I let him stand because he was freer that way. I remember the day he got me a present so clearly. I hate how I can remember every detail of my life before Billy and Billy's death. He brought his finished painting to my desk, and at first I was disappointed. It was called A Beach at Night, but everything in Johnny's painting was a different shade of blue. Not just the sea, blue sand, blue hills, blue boat, and a blue sun. I asked Johnny why he hadn't used other colors, and he said in a frightened way,
"Well, miss, it's a beach at night time, you see."
They called him John Blue after that. Perhaps he still paints. I hope so. When the police arrived, Mrs. Conway didn't let them enter the house, Tom Smith said, nor the priest either. In the end, the police had to break the window and get in that way. They found her upstairs, washing the child in the bathtub. The blood-stained water went everywhere, over the walls and the mirror, wetting the priest and the doctor as they forced the dead boy out of her arms. Dr. Perry phoned his wife, who came over and stayed in the house. Mrs. Conway didn't come out of the bathroom until the next morning. She came downstairs, still covered in blood, and told Mrs. Perry to kindly leave her house. She hasn't been seen outside her house and garden since the child was buried. From the high hill, Tom says he sometimes sees her sitting all day at one of her windows, or walking naked to the woodpile, or throwing food out for her cats. As John Blue drove the van up the driveway, he looked around for her, as he always did. He threw his cigarette out of the window, thinking to himself that he had only 2 cigarettes left and that the old lady wouldn't be paying him until tomorrow afternoon. He should better save them. He looked up at the high hill behind Mrs. Conway's and thought that Tom Smith was probably spending a lot more time up there than he needed to. September 23rd. I found a Christmas cake that I hadn't ordered in the box of groceries yesterday. Sometimes a man comes to the gate and stands there, looking up at the house. Who is he, I wonder? He was there last week and again today. I feel Billy's presence strongly today. I got the Christmas tree from the cellar and put it in the sitting room with colored lights and pretty glass balls on it. I write in its red, blue, and green light. I have wrapped his favorite toys and put them under the tree. I close my eyes and there he is, lying on the carpet by the tree, opening his presents, turning his blonde head around to smile up at me, not minding a bit that they are the same presents as last year. I drink my wine and eat a slice of Christmas cake. Too rich for you, Billy, too rich. John couldn't imagine his old art teacher naked. Every other woman in town had spent time naked in his dreams, even Mrs. Murphy in the post office. Mrs. Conway was older than her, but not by 100 years. She could only be 40 or so, and she had had a good shape back then during his time at school. He had liked her. She hadn't laughed at him for being stupid. She had put up a painting he had done of a beach at nighttime, right beside the board where everybody could see it. That was good. It was worth being called John Blue for that. October 8th. This week, John Blue hid a couple of mangoes in the box. I love him for these small presents, the only kisses I receive. Today the stranger walked up the driveway to the door. I saw him clearly through the glass, tall, blonde-haired, black-eyed, serious. He just stood there for a long time. He didn't move. One of the cats scratched at the kitchen window, and I looked away for a minute. When I looked back, he was gone. John felt sorry for the white mother cat. She came up to him as he pulled back the side door of the van. He reached down to scratch her head and said,
"It's not much of a life for you. Not like you used to have, anyway."
He was halfway to the front door when he saw last week's box exactly where he had left it. A line of black ants led from the box to a hole in the house. Confused, he walked up and down for a while, looking at the front door and windows. He put the box he was carrying back into the van, lifted his t-shirt, and scratched his stomach. Near the corner of the house, he saw a torn egg box and a pile of clean cow bones. November 9th. I feel so heavy. As the world outside grows lighter and fills with hope, I become heavier. My paintings are almost with no color. I paint from one window now, from Billy's room, which gives the best view of the gate. My handsome stranger is making good progress. He began by laying out the stones in rows and writing numbers on them. Sometimes he stood up and looked back at me, serious as always. The wall is finished. All that remains are the pillar and the gate. John smoked a cigarette, then knocked on the door. For the first time since he began deliveries to Mrs. Conway nearly a year before.
"Just leave the box by the door, and she'll take the groceries in herself,"
Thomas Horan had said. But John couldn't just drop the new box down beside the old one and let the ants run all over it. When he knocked, the door opened. It hadn't been properly shut.
"Mrs. Conway?"
He called into the shadowy hall. December 21st. John still leaves his little presents. Yesterday, it was a pack of sweets. I cannot eat them, but I feel grateful, and that feeling keeps me going. The pillar is almost finished. The gate is lying on the grass, ready to be put back in place. John felt cold. These thick-walled country houses were impossible to heat from a single wood fire. His eyes slowly got used to the darkness.
"Mrs. Conway?"
He called again. He went into the sitting room. There was a painting she had been working on, and others leaning against the wall. An untidy pile of silver spoons and forks lay on the carpet. He closed the door and moved toward the back of the house where the kitchen was, he supposed. This door was open. He turned on the light. There was a fridge in the corner, still working. There were blackened bananas and apples in a glass bowl. He could see that rats had been there. They had eaten the bread and cheese, and there were even teeth marks in a piece of green soap in a dish. John went back into the hall and stood at the bottom of the stairs. He felt colder than ever.
Mrs. Conway?
He called as he walked up the stairs. January 14th. I have washed all my brushes for the last time. I emptied the wooden knife and fork box and put them in it, along with all my paints. My present to you, John Blue. Tomorrow I will walk through the gate. The smell of paint cleaner remains in the air. While John waited for Ronald, the policeman and Dr. Perry to finish inside, he smoked his last cigarette, looking out at the dark high hills. A yellow light came from the open doorway and upstairs window of the house. He had just finished his cigarette when Ronald came out and gave him a small wooden box. He told John to go home and that the ambulance could take an hour to get there from Church Lane, and that there was no point in waiting. Ronald would see him tomorrow. Ambulances never hurry for the already dead. John drove back into town and parked outside Horan's hotel. Through the hotel window, he could see his mother at her card game, the dog at her feet. He went inside the van and took out Mrs. Conway's box of brushes and paints from the passenger seat. He shut the door with his shoulder, put her present under his arm, and began to walk. He felt nervous, but welcomed, like a stranger at home in what once was a foreign land.